Laughter echoes differently in the void. Not the sound itself. Sound cannot travel through the vacuum between stars, but the meaning, the weight of it, the way it ripples outward through time and memory until it becomes something heavier than any physical force. I have spent 240 years studying the nature of galactic politics, the rise and fall of empires, the delicate mathematics of interstellar diplomacy.
In all that time, I never understood the true cost of laughter until I watched my civilization pay for it in blood and fire and the silence of empty worlds.
My name is Velith Karim, and I was the chronicler of first impressions for the Galactic Council, the official tasked with recording initial contact events, preserving the words spoken when species first encountered one another, documenting the moments that would define relationships lasting millennia. I witnessed 317 first contacts during my tenure.
I recorded declarations of war and offers of alliance, threats and promises, the full spectrum of what sentient beings say when they meet across the darkness.
But only one first contact truly mattered. Only one would determine the fate of everything. And I recorded it wrong. We all did.
The Keth'vari Ascendancy discovered humanity 187 standard years ago. A routine survey mission detected their electromagnetic emissions, chaotic bursts of radio waves, primitive telecommunications, the fumbling first attempts of a species learning to shout into the dark. The survey team observed for 3 cycles, compiled their report, and submitted it to the Council for review.
I remember reading that report in my chambers overlooking the crystalline spires of Velen Prime. I remember the weight of the data pad in my hands, the glow of 3 moons through my window, the absolute certainty I felt as I processed the information. A new species, tool users, limited spacefaring capability, aggressive tendencies, internal conflicts suggesting species instability. Recommendation: monitor but do not engage. Expected timeline to self-extinction, 3 to 5 centuries. I approved the recommendation without hesitation. Why wouldn't I? The report was thorough, the analysis sound, the conclusion logical. Humanity was simply another young species burning too bright, consuming itself in the fires of its own aggression. The galaxy had seen thousands of such species. Most destroyed themselves before achieving meaningful interstellar presence. Those that survived typically required extensive guidance from elder civilizations before they could be trusted with the responsibilities of galactic citizenship. Humanity, the report concluded, showed no signs of possessing the stability required for such guidance to be effective. 73 years later, humanity achieved faster-than-light travel. This was unexpected, not impossible. Other young species had made similar leaps, but unusual given their apparent internal instabilities. The Council convened an emergency session to discuss the implications. I was there, recording every word, every gesture, every subtle shift of emotion as the representatives of 12,000 civilizations debated the human question. The Keth'vari representatives spoke first. They have developed what they call a skip drive. Crude, inefficient, but functional. They are establishing colonies on nearby worlds. Their expansion rate exceeds our initial projections by a factor of 4. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. A factor of 4 was significant. It suggested either exceptional resourcefulness or exceptional desperation, and neither option was particularly reassuring. "What is their military posture?" asked Councillor Threneth of the Velani Communion, the eldest of our members, her voice carrying the weight of 18,000 years of civilization.
Defensive, primarily, they maintain standing forces, but their weapons technology remains generations behind our own. Their largest warships would struggle against a Keth'vari patrol frigate.
Then they posed no threat.
Not in the conventional sense. However, their rate of technological advancement is concerning. They appear to innovate under pressure in ways that our models do not predict. I recorded these words carefully. I noted the subtle undertones of unease in the Keth'vari representative's voice, but I did not understand what they meant. None of us did. The council debated for 3 cycles. Proposals were offered and rejected. Some argued for immediate contact, reasoning that humanity could be guided toward stability before their aggressive tendencies caused problems. Others advocated for continued observation, suggesting that the species should be allowed to mature at its own pace. A small faction, dismissed by most as alarmist, recommended preventive action, arguing that humanity's unpredictability made them too dangerous to ignore.
In the end, the Council chose what it always chose, the path of minimal effort.
Humanity would be offered provisional observer status, the lowest tier of galactic recognition. They would be permitted to attend council sessions, to submit petitions, to engage in limited trade with willing species, but they would have no voice, no vote, no meaningful participation in galactic governance.
Let them prove themselves, Councillor Threnif declared. If they survive their own nature long enough to develop wisdom, we will reconsider their status. If they do not, she made a gesture that transcended species, a dismissal, a shrug, an acknowledgement that the universe was full of species that had failed to survive their own natures.
The Council laughed.
I recorded it. The moment is preserved in the archives. The sound of 12,000 representatives finding amusement in the notion of humanity, this fractious young species ever achieving anything of significance. It was not cruel laughter, not precisely. It was the laughter of those who had seen everything, who understood the patterns of galactic history, who knew with absolute certainty how such stories ended. Humanity was irrelevant. The Council had declared it so, and the matter was closed. The human delegation arrived 14 cycles later. 3 representatives, dressed in simple uniforms, carrying no weapons, displaying no obvious technology. They sat in the observer section, a small cluster of seats reserved for species not yet worthy of full participation. I watched them during that first session. It was my duty to observe, to record, to note the subtle details that might prove significant in future relations. I expected nervousness. Young species typically displayed obvious signs of intimidation when confronting the assembled might of galactic civilization. I expected deference, the recognition that they were in the presence of their betters.
I saw neither.
The human delegates sat quietly, their faces composed, their postures relaxed but attentive. They watched the proceedings with expressions I could not read. When the Council discussed matters of galactic import, trade agreements, territorial disputes, the allocation of resources, they took notes, careful, methodical notes. At the session's end, the senior human delegate, a woman named Ambassador Catherine Okonkwo, approached the chronicler's platform. This was unusual. Observers rarely sought interaction with council officials, understanding implicitly that their role was to watch and learn, not to engage.
"Chronicler Kareem," she said, her pronunciation of my name surprisingly accurate. "I understand you maintain the archives of first contact events."
That is correct.
I would be interested in accessing those archives if such access is permitted for observer species.
I hesitated. The request was technically within protocol. Observers were permitted access to non-classified historical records, but no observer species had ever asked. They were typically too overwhelmed by their new circumstances, too focused on immediate concerns, to care about ancient history.
May I ask why? Ambassador Okonkwo's expression did not change. We find it useful to understand the mistakes of those who came before us. It helps us avoid making the same ones.
There was something in her voice, not threat, not challenge, but a quiet certainty that unsettled me in ways I could not articulate. I granted her request. I told myself it was simply adherence to protocol.
In truth, I was curious.
Over the following decades, humanity proved to be different. Not in obvious ways. They did not achieve dramatic technological breakthroughs or win spectacular military victories or accumulate vast political influence. They simply persisted. They attended every council session. They submitted carefully worded petitions that were invariably rejected but never seemed to discourage them.
They established trade relationships with minor species, built modest stations in unclaimed systems, expanded their territory in small but steady increments.
And they watched.
That was what I noticed most in my role as chronicler. Human observers watched everything. They studied council proceedings with an intensity that bordered on uncomfortable. They analyzed voting patterns, tracked alliance formations, documented the subtle power dynamics that shaped galactic politics. When council representatives made speeches, human delegates recorded them. When council members made decisions, human analysts predicted them with increasing accuracy. "They are learning us," the Keth'vari representative commented during a private meeting of senior council officials, "mapping our behaviors like one might map a territory."
"Let them learn," Councillor Threneth replied. "Knowledge without power is merely frustration. They can understand us perfectly and it will change nothing. We are the council. They are observers. That hierarchy is immutable." The council laughed again, lighter this time, the laughter of those secure in their position, amused by the pretensions of an inferior species that thought understanding could substitute for strength. Humanity never responded to this laughter. Not with anger, not with protest, not with any visible reaction at all. They simply continued their work, their endless, patient observation, their quiet accumulation of knowledge. 53 years after humanity gained observer status, the Keth'vari emerged from the galactic rim. I remember the first reports, distress signals from a Keth'vari research station, fragmentary, desperate, cut short. Then silence. The council dispatched an investigation fleet. The fleet arrived, transmitted initial observations, and vanished. Another fleet was sent. It too vanished. By the time the council understood what was happening, the Keth'vari had consumed 17 systems and were accelerating. The Keth'vari were not a species in any recognizable sense. They were a process, a self-replicating cascade of matter conversion that transformed everything it touched into more of itself. Planets, ships, stations, people, all became raw material for expansion. They did not communicate, did not negotiate, did not respond to any attempt at contact. They simply consumed. And they were fast, faster than anything the Council had ever encountered. Traditional containment strategies failed because the Keth'vari expanded faster than response fleets could mobilize. Attack formations failed because the Keth'vari simply absorbed the weapons used against them and grew stronger.
Evacuation efforts failed because the Keth'vari moved faster than civilian transports could flee. Within 3 years, they had consumed over 200 systems, 40 billion sentient beings converted to gray ash and machinery. 6 council species driven to extinction, their worlds now nothing but expanding factories of Keth'vari replication. I watched the council during this period. I recorded the debates, the accusations, the slowly mounting terror. The laughter was gone now. In its place was something I had never seen in 12,000 years of galactic civilization.
Fear. They cannot be stopped, Counselor Threneth declared in a closed session, her voice barely above a whisper. Every defense we mount, they adapt to. Every weapon we deploy, they incorporate. They are learning from us, evolving in response to our attacks, becoming stronger with every engagement.
Then we must find a weapon they cannot adapt to, the Keth'vari representative argued. Something so overwhelming that no adaptation is possible.
Such a weapon does not exist. The combined might of the Council cannot produce sufficient force to overwhelm their replication rate. We have calculated the mathematics. It is impossible.
The chamber fell silent, the silence of those confronting the unthinkable, the silence of ancient civilizations realizing that their time might be ending. It was during this silence that the human observers spoke.
The Council's mathematics are based on linear projections.
Every head turned. Human observers did not speak in council sessions. They did not have the right. They were observers, silent witnesses to the affairs of their betters. Ambassador Okonkwo stood in the observer section, unchanged from the day I had first seen her decades ago. The same composed expression, the same quiet certainty, the same unsettling calm. "You will be silent," Counselor Threneth commanded. "Your species has no voice in these proceedings." "I am aware of our status, Counselor. But I am also aware that your species, and most of the species in this chamber, will cease to exist within 2 decades if current projections hold. I thought that might be worth mentioning." The audacity was shocking. I recorded every word, every subtle shift of expression, knowing that I was witnessing something unprecedented. "You dare?" "I dare to offer what we have learned. Humanity has been studying the Keth'vari since their emergence. We have identified patterns in their behavior that your analysts have missed. We have developed theoretical countermeasures that your scientists have not considered. We have—" "Enough!" Counselor Threneth's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "Humanity was offered observer status because we believed you might eventually develop the wisdom to contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization. That patience is apparently misplaced. Your arrogance, presuming to advise species that were building starships when your ancestors were learning to control fire, is precisely the instability we predicted." "Our analysis—"
"Your analysis is irrelevant. Your species is irrelevant. When this crisis is resolved, the Council will reconsider your status. Until then, you will be silent." Ambassador Okonkwo did not argue. She did not protest. She simply nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement, and resumed her seat. As she sat, she looked directly at me. Our eyes met across the chamber, and in that moment I saw something in her expression that I did not understand. Not anger, not humiliation, not even frustration.
The council continued its deliberations. Plans were proposed and rejected. Alliances were formed and dissolved. Resources were allocated and depleted.
The greatest minds of 12,000 civilizations bent their efforts towards stopping the Keth'vari advance.
They failed. 7 years after Counselor Threneth silenced Ambassador Okonkwo, the Keth'vari had consumed over 1,000 systems. The Council had lost half its member species. The survivors had retreated to core territories, abandoning the outer regions in a desperate attempt to consolidate defenses. I evacuated Valen Prime 3 cycles before the Keth'vari reached it. I watched from an escape vessel as my homeworld, 18,000 years of culture, history, beauty, was converted to gray machinery in less than a standard day. I watched, and I recorded, and I felt something break inside me that would never fully heal. During the evacuation, I noticed something strange. Human ships were everywhere. Small vessels, unarmed, helping to coordinate refugee movements. They asked nothing in return. They made no demands, sought no political advantage. They simply helped.
Why? I asked one of the human coordinators, a young man who introduced himself as Lieutenant Commander David Chen. Why would you help us? The Council treated your species with contempt. We laughed at you. We silenced your ambassador when she tried to offer assistance.
Lieutenant Commander Chen looked at me with an expression I could not read. Because you need help. That is not a reason. For humanity, it is. I did not understand. I recorded the exchange, filed it away, and continued with my evacuation duties. There would be time to analyze such mysteries later. If there was a later...
The remnants of the Council convened in the Serenthi system, one of the last heavily defended positions. The chamber was sparse now. Where once 12,000 representatives had gathered, fewer than 2,000 remained. Many seats were empty, their species extinct or consumed. Others held refugees, representatives of civilizations that no longer had homeworlds to represent.
Counselor Threneth was still alive, still presiding, though she had aged visibly in ways that our species rarely showed. The weight of extinction pressed down on her, visible in every gesture, every word.
"We have exhausted our options," she announced. "The Keth'vari will reach the core territories within 18 months. Our combined fleets cannot stop them. Our weapons cannot harm them faster than they replicate. Our populations cannot evacuate faster than they advance." She paused, and I saw something I never expected to see on her ancient face. Tears.
I am calling for a final consultation. Let every species offer what wisdom they possess. Let every voice be heard, one last time, before the end. One by one, representatives spoke. Some offered prayers, some offered regrets, some offered final defiance that everyone knew was hollow. The Keth'vari representative, one of the last of his kind, described a plan to preserve cultural archives in subspace bubbles, hoping that some future civilization might discover them.
When the last representative finished, silence fell over the chamber.
And then Ambassador Okonkwo stood.
"The Council laughed at humanity," she said, her voice quiet but carrying through the chamber. "You declared us irrelevant. You silenced us when we tried to offer help. You believed that your 18,000 years of civilization made you superior, made you wise, made you capable of handling any challenge the universe could present."
Ambassador, Counselor Threneth began.
You were wrong.
The words hung in the air. Simple, final, absolute. When the Council laughed, humanity never responded. Not because we had nothing to say, but because words were not what was required. Actions were required. Preparation was required.
The slow, patient work of building something that could survive what was coming.
What are you saying?
I am saying that while the Council laughed and debated and failed, humanity prepared. While you dismissed us as primitive and unstable, we studied. While you rejected our offers of assistance, we built. We have had 7 decades to understand the Keth'vari. We have had 7 decades to develop countermeasures. We have had 7 decades to prepare for this moment.
Counselor Threneth's expression shifted, confusion, hope, disbelief warring across her features. You claim to have a solution? A species that was building primitive rockets when our ancestors founded the Council?
Yes.
That is impossible. The Keth'vari adapt to everything. They incorporate every weapon, every strategy, every defense. Our finest scientists have proven that no force can overwhelm their replication rate. The mathematics are absolute.
The mathematics are wrong.
A murmur rippled through the chamber. Wrong? No species had ever told Counselor Threneth she was wrong. The very concept seemed blasphemous.
Ambassador Okonkwo continued. The Keth'vari adapt to external threats. They incorporate technology. They evolve in response to attacks. Your scientists have accurately documented this behavior. What they failed to understand is the implication.
Which is?
The Keth'vari are reactive. They respond to what is done to them. They learn from attacks and incorporate the knowledge. But they cannot anticipate. They cannot predict. They cannot prepare for something they have never encountered.
Nothing they have encountered has stopped them.
Because everything they have encountered has been a variation of the same fundamental approach: advanced technology, overwhelming force, direct confrontation. The Council has been fighting with increasingly sophisticated versions of the same basic strategy for 7 years. The Keth'vari have had 7 years to adapt to that strategy. Of course they have become immune.
Counselor Threneth leaned forward. And humanity has developed, what? A different strategy? Not a strategy, a philosophy. The Council believes that civilization is about accumulating power, more technology, more resources, more territory, more control. Humanity believes that civilization is about something else.
What?
Survival. The word echoed through the chamber. I recorded it, sensing that I was witnessing something profound, something that would reshape the understanding of every species present. For most of our history, Ambassador Okonkwo said, humanity has been a species on the edge of extinction. Ice ages nearly froze us, plagues nearly killed us, wars nearly destroyed us. We have survived not because we were the strongest or the smartest or the most technologically advanced. We have survived because we refused to stop. Because when everything else failed, we adapted. We changed. We became something new.
Pretty words, the Keth'vari representative said bitterly. But words will not stop the Keth'vari.
No, they won't. Ambassador Okonkwo touched something on her wrist. This will.
The chamber's display systems activated, showing a tactical overlay of the galaxy. The Keth'vari presence was marked in gray, a spreading stain that had consumed a quarter of charted space.
And then new symbols appeared. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, emerging from human space, from hidden positions throughout the galaxy, from locations that no Council survey had ever detected.
"What am I seeing?" Counselor Threneth whispered.
The Human Defense Fleet, 47,000 vessels, built in shipyards that the Council never knew existed, using technology that we did not report because you never asked.
We have been preparing for an extinction-level threat since before we achieved faster-than-light travel, since before we knew what form that threat would take. This is what humanity does, Counselor. We prepare, we endure, we survive. The chamber erupted. Voices overlapped. Shock, disbelief, demands for explanation. I recorded everything, my hands trembling, my mind struggling to process what I was witnessing. 47,000 vessels. The Council's combined fleets at their height had numbered 60,000. Humanity had built nearly that many in complete secrecy, while the Council dismissed them as irrelevant.
How? I found myself asking, my chronicler's discipline failing. How is this possible?
Ambassador Okonkwo looked at me. The same gaze she had fixed on me decades ago after Counselor Threneth silenced her. The same unsettling certainty.
Because we never stopped working, Chronicler. The Council laughed, and we built. The Council debated, and we researched. The Council dismissed us, and we prepared. Every year, every decade, every generation, we prepared. Because we knew, in a way that ancient civilizations cannot understand, that survival is never guaranteed, that the universe is indifferent to age, to wisdom, to accumulated power, that the only thing that matters is whether you are ready when the darkness comes.
But the Keth'vari adapt to technology. Your ships.
Our ships are not our weapon. She smiled then, a small expression that somehow conveyed infinite weight. Our weapon is what we've learned about adaptation itself.
The tactical display shifted, focusing on the leading edge of the human fleet. I watched as the ships engaged the Keth'vari, but not with conventional weapons, not with the overwhelming force that the Council had tried and failed to apply.
They used something else.
The Keth'vari replicate by converting matter into more of themselves, Ambassador Okonkwo explained. They adapt by incorporating the technology used against them. Both processes require information, patterns that tell them how to replicate, how to adapt. We are giving them information, wrong information.
On the display, the Keth'vari were changing. Their expansion was slowing. Their perfect coordination was breaking down. Individual swarms were separating from the collective, moving in patterns that seemed random, confused.
Corruption, Counselor Threneth breathed. You're corrupting their replication algorithms.
We're feeding them errors, subtle flaws in the conversion patterns, slight variations in the adaptation protocols. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger their error correction systems, just enough to introduce instability, chaos.
But they will adapt. They always adapt.
They will try, but we're not giving them a weapon to adapt to. We're giving them information disguised as a weapon. And every time they try to incorporate it, they incorporate more errors, more chaos, more instability. They're adapting to their own destruction.
I watched the display. The Keth'vari expansion was not just slowing, it was reversing. Swarms were collapsing, their coordination failing, their replication cascades becoming unstable. Individual units were consuming each other, unable to distinguish between self and enemy. The gray stain on the galaxy was shrinking.
This is not a battle, I said slowly. This is not even a war. It's a cure, Ambassador Okonkwo said. The Keth'vari are not an enemy to be defeated. They are a disease to be treated, an imbalance to be corrected. We are not destroying them. We are helping them destroy themselves. The chamber was silent. On every face I saw the same expression,
The slow dawning of understanding, the humiliation of realizing how completely they had misjudged humanity, the awe of witnessing something that should have been impossible.
How long, Counselor Threneth asked, how long until the Keth'vari are eliminated?
They will never be fully eliminated. The corruption will reduce them to manageable levels, but some remnants will always persist. We estimate a 97% reduction in activity within 18 months. The remaining 3% will continue to exist in isolated pockets, but they will no longer pose a meaningful threat.
18 months. The same timeline you predicted for the destruction of our core territories.
Yes. You knew exactly how long the Council had before the Keth'vari reached your position. You could have let us be destroyed, could have waited until the Keth'vari had consumed everything except human space, then deployed your cure from a position of absolute dominance.
Yes.
Why didn't you?
Ambassador Okonkwo was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the chamber.
Because that is not who we choose to be.
I saw Counselor Threneth's expression shift from confusion to understanding to something that looked almost like shame. For 18,000 years, the Velnoxi communion had believed that wisdom came from accumulation, more knowledge, more power, more control. They had looked at younger species with condescension, seeing only what those species lacked compared to themselves.
They had never considered what they might lack compared to the young.
The Council laughed at humanity, Counselor Thrain said slowly. We declared you irrelevant. We silenced your ambassador when she tried to help us. And yet you came. You saved us. You saved all of us.
Yes. Why?
Ambassador Okonkwo stepped down from the observer section. She crossed the floor of the council chamber, a space that no observer had ever entered, a boundary that had been absolute for 12,000 years. She walked until she stood before Counselor Threneth, and she spoke words that I would record and that would echo through galactic history for millennia.
Because we have been where you are now. We have faced extinction again and again, and we have learned that survival is not about being the strongest or the wisest or the most powerful. It is about being willing to do what must be done, regardless of cost. It is about understanding that every species, no matter how different, has value. It is about recognizing that the universe is too vast and too dangerous for any of us to face alone.
You could rule the galaxy now. With your fleet, your technology, your understanding of threats we cannot even comprehend, you could claim dominion over everything.
We could, we will not.
Why not?
Because empires fall, Counselor. Civilizations crumble. Power, no matter how absolute, eventually fades. Only one thing endures: the choice of who we want to be. Humanity has made that choice. We choose to be the species that helps, that protects, that stands against the darkness, not because it benefits us, but because it is right.
Counselor Threneth was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she rose from her seat, the ancient seat of the Council's presiding voice, occupied continuously for 12 millennia, and she bowed.
Not a bow of defeat, not a bow of submission, a bow of respect from one civilization to another, from age to youth, from pride to humility.
The Council was wrong, she said. We laughed at you, and we were wrong. Humanity is not irrelevant. Humanity is exactly what this galaxy needs. Not rulers, not conquerors, but guardians.
protectors, the ones who stand against the darkness because they choose to." Ambassador Okonkwo returned the bow. "We accept the compliment, Counselor, and we offer this in return: full partnership, not dominion, not superiority, partnership. The Council's wisdom combined with humanity's stubbornness. Together, we can build something better than either could achieve alone."
Partnership.
"If you're willing."
Counselor Threneth smiled, a genuine smile, perhaps the first I had ever seen on her ancient face. "We are willing. The Council is willing, and perhaps, in time, we will learn to be worthy of the species that saved us."
I recorded all of it. Every word, every gesture, every subtle shift of emotion. I recorded the moment when the observer became the savior, when the dismissed became the indispensable, when humanity stepped out of the shadows and into the light.
And I recorded what happened next in the years that followed. The reconstruction of the devastated regions, the gradual healing of species that had lost everything, the slow building of something new, not the old Council, arrogant and dismissive, but something better, a true partnership of species, each contributing what they could, each learning from the others.
Humanity never sought power in this new order. They never demanded the authority that their victory would have justified. They simply continued doing what they had always done, helping, protecting, standing against whatever darkness the universe sent next. And when the next darkness came, because it always comes, they were ready. They were always ready, because that is what humanity does. They prepare, they endure, they survive.
I am old now, older than I was when I first recorded humanity's arrival, older than I was when I watched my world die. I have seen the galaxy transform, seen the arrogance of ancient civilizations humbled by the quiet strength of a species they once dismissed as primitive.
And I have learned the true meaning of what happened all those years ago when the Galactic Council laughed at humanity.
They never responded. Not with words, not with protests, not with the wounded pride that lesser species might have displayed. They simply continued their work, building in silence, preparing for the inevitable, becoming something that the Council could not imagine.
The laughter was forgotten. The silence endured.
And when the darkness came, it was humanity, quiet, patient, unstoppable humanity that held the light.
There is a memorial now in the rebuilt council chambers. It does not celebrate victory or power or the triumph of strength. It is simply a plaque bearing words that humanity brought with them from their homeworld, words that define who they are and who they choose to be. We do not inherit the galaxy from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. The Council laughed at humanity once. They do not laugh anymore.
They listen.
They learn.
And they are grateful. So very, very grateful.